Welcome to an APUSH production video of the Gilded Age. The era known as the Industrial Revolution was a period in which fundamental changes occurred in agriculture, textile and metal manufacture, transportation, economic policies, and the social structure in England and the United States. It set the foundation for the Gilded Age with technology and efficiency. This period is appropriately labeled revolution, for it thoroughly destroyed the old manner of doing things. Yet the term is simultaneously inappropriate, for it implies an abrupt change. The changes that occurred during this period of 1760 to 1850, in fact, occurred gradually.
The Industrial Revolution led to new forms of technology, including the technology which allowed the building of the Transcontinental Railway. In 1845, the New York entrepreneur Asa Whitney presented a resolution in Congress proposing federal funding for a railroad that would stretch to the Pacific. Lobbying efforts over the next several years failed due to the growing sectionalism in Congress, but the idea remained a potent one. In 1860, a young engineer named Theodore Jediah identified the infamous Donner Pass in Northern California as an ideal location for the construction of a railway through the formidable Sierra Nevada mountains. 1861, Jediah had enlisted a group of investors in Sacramento to form the Central Pacific Railroad Company. He then headed to Washington, where he was able to convince the congressional leaders as well as President Abraham Lincoln, who signed the Pacific Railroad Act into law the following year. The Central Pacific Railroad Company would start building in Sacramento and continue east across the Sierra Nevada, while a second company, the Union Pacific Railroad, would build westward from the Missouri River near the Idaho-Nebraska border. The two lines of track would meet in the middle, and each company would receive 6,400 acres of land, which later doubled to 12,800, and $48,000 in government bonds for every mile of track they built. From the beginning, then, the building of the Transcontinental Railroad was set up in terms of a competition between the two companies. By early 1869, the companies were working 1 mile from each other, and in March, the newly inaugurated President Ulysses S. Grant announced he would withhold federal funds until the two railroad companies agreed on a meeting point. They decided on Promontory Summit, north of the Great Salt Lake, some 690 track miles from Sacramento and 1,086 from Omaha. On May 10th, after several delays, a crowd of workers and dignitaries watched as the final spike was driven, linking the Central Pacific and Union Pacific. Telegraph cables immediately went out to President Grant and around the country with the news that the Transcontinental Railroad had been completed.
Another great inventor of the time was Thomas Alva Edison, the most prolific inventor in American history. He created a record of 1,093 patents covering key innovations and minor improvements in a wide range of fields, including telecommunications, electric power, sound recording, motion pictures, primary and storage batteries, and mining and cement technology. He also broadened the notion of invention to encompass what we now call innovation: invention, research, development, and commercialization, and invented the Industrial Research Laboratory. His role as an innovator was evident not only in his two major companies at Menlo Park and West Orange in New Jersey, but in more than 300 companies worldwide to manufacture and market his inventions. Yes, he did create new inventions which have influenced modern technology, but in doing so, he created a global economy which allowed these technologies to be easy for the common many to achieve.
Alexander Graham Bell, born on March 3, 1847 in Edinburgh, Scotland. His education was largely received through numerous experiments in sound and the furthering of his father's work on visible speech for the deaf. He dedicated his life to help the deaf with forms of communication and exchanging of information. Bell worked with Thomas Watson on the design and patent of the first practical telephone. In all, Bell held 18 patents in his name alone, and 12 shared with collaborators. He died in 1922. The Gilded Age was an era of rapid industrialization, laissez-faire capitalism, and no income tax. Laissez-faire capitalism is an economic system that lets its people do as they please, and the government does not involve itself in the economic system or any business matters. Captains of industry, like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie, made fortune, while others, such as Jay Gould, left a trail of corruption to rise to the tops. Industrialists were able to choose from 6 forms of business, each one having different characteristics. They were sole proprietor, a corporation, partnership, an S corporation, a trust, and a non-profit organization. John Davison Rockefeller was an American oil industrialist, investor, and philanthropist. He was the founder of the Standard Oil Company, which dominated the oil industry and was the first great U.S. business trust. In 1807, Rockefeller teamed with his brother William Henry M. Flagler and Samuel Andrews to establish the Standard Oil Company. Beginning in the 1870s, Standard Oil employed a number of cutthroat business practices, including monopolization, rate wars, rebates, and intimidation. Rockefeller adhered to the wealth of nations, an influential statement of the case for laissez-faire capitalism. The monopoly, made popular in the Gilded Age, exists when a specific person or enterprise is the only supplier of a particular commodity. However, gaining a monopoly wasn't the only efficient way to gain economic power. Henry Ford, the founding father of American consumerism, born in 1863, created the Ford Motor Company, as well as sponsoring the development of the assembly line technique of mass production. As owner of the Ford Motor Company, he became one of the richest and best-known people in the world. Ford had a global vision, with consumerism as the key to peace. His intense commitment to systematically lowering costs resulted in many technical and business innovations, including a franchise system that put dealerships throughout most of North America and in major cities on 6 continents. These tycoons created new forms of business organization that were devised that supported economic growth. Confronted by the ragged cycles of an immature industrial economy, industrialists experimented with new forms of organization. They began by forming pools of cartels. In these loose associations, former competitors became informal partners and tried to smooth out the market through the adoption of gentlemen's agreement on production levels and prices. Soon these informal alliances evolved into more formal cooperative ventures among owners. By forming trusts and holding companies, they avoided state laws forbidding monopolies while reaping the benefit of unified control over entire industries. Other industrialists cared little for the consumer, instead manipulating the market to their will. Jay Gould was such a man. A U.S. railroad executive, speculator, and robber baron, in 1867, he became a director of the Erie Railroad. To this end, he engaged in outrageous financial manipulations, including the issue of fraudulent stock and the payment of lavish bribes to New York state legislators to legalize the stock sale. In 1869, they attempted to corner the gold market, causing the Black Friday panic. He remained ruthless, unscrupulous, and friendless to the end. Cornelius Vanderbilt was a wealthy, corrupt railroad tycoon and innovator. Vanderbilt was one of the first in the industry to make rails out of steel instead of iron, and also established a standard gauge for his railroads. Despite these innovations that led to the improvement of the railroad industry, he and his son were notorious robber barons who issued unfair rebates, hiked rates arbitrarily, and cared little for American consumers. Industrialists like Gould used their wealth for conspicuous consumption, while those of the elite would buy expensive services and products in order to flaunt their wealth. Not all industrialists were corrupt, however. J. Piermont Morgan was a wealthy Wall Street banker who saved the nearly bankrupt federal government in 1895 by loaning the Treasury more than $60 million. Morgan later purchased